My son asked me to co-sign for his dream home as my last gift to him. He promised me a beautiful suite where I'd be honored and cared for. The day after the sale closed, he drove me to a nursing home and left me there. He thought he'd used my good credit to get his perfect life, and that I was just a loose end to be tied up. He didn't know that I knew a thing or two about rules and regulations. So I made one quiet phone call and reported his loan fraud to the bank, and I let them take back everything. Before I begin, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. My name is Margaret Reed, and for 40 years I drove a city bus in Baltimore. I know a thing or two about staying in your lane. This is the story of what happened when my own son swerved into mine, and how I made sure he crashed and burned. For 40 years, my life was a map of the city of Baltimore, etched into my memory by the rumbling engine of a city bus. I knew every pothole on Pratt Street, every tricky left turn on Charles. I was a bus driver. Not a glamorous job, but an honest one. It was a life of early mornings, of watching the sun rise over the harbor, of the steady rhythmic thump of tires on pavement. It was a life of service, of getting people where they needed to go safely and on time. At 72 I was retired, a widow and the proud sole owner of a brick row house in Hampton that my late husband Charles and I had bought when we were just kids with more dreams than dollars. It wasn't a big house, but it was ours. We had paid it off 10 years ago, a milestone we celebrated with a bottle of cheap champagne and a deep, profound sense of security. The house was my fortress. Its foundation was built on a lifetime of hard work, of overtime shifts, of packing our own lunches and saving every penny we could. My life now was quiet, frugal, and orderly. I had my pension from the city, my social security, and a healthy savings account that I guarded with the fierce protectiveness of a dragon on its hoard. I lived a simple life. I had my garden in the back alley, my weekly card game with the other widows on the block, and my Sunday dinners with my niece Angela. I was content. My son Stephen was not. Stephen was a man who had been born with a deep and abiding hunger for things he could not afford. At 45 he was a real estate agent, a job that seemed to perfectly suit his flashy, superficial nature. He drove a leased luxury car, wore suits that were a little too shiny, and had a smile that was a little too wide. He was a man who was obsessed with the appearance of success, a man who believed that the right brand of watch or the right address could fill the empty, insecure space in his soul. His wife, Jessica, was the gasoline on his fire. She was a woman whose entire sense of self-worth was tied up in what other people thought of her. She was a social climber and my son was her ladder. Together they lived a life that was a carefully constructed illusion, a performance of wealth funded by a mountain of credit card debt. They ate at the most expensive restaurants, took lavish vacations they couldn't afford, and were always just one missed commission check away from total financial collapse. I loved my son, but I did not understand him. He had been raised in this house, a house built on the values of hard work and living within your means. But somewhere along the way he had come to see my frugal, sensible life not as a source of pride, but as a source of shame. He and Jessica would come for holidays, and I could see the way they looked at my comfortable, worn furniture, my simple home-cooked meals. It was a look of pity, of a faint, polite disgust. "Mom," Stephen would say, his voice full of a false, gentle concern, "you should really let us get you a new sofa. Something more modern." "There is nothing wrong with this sofa, Stephen," I'd say, my voice firm. "Your father and I bought it in 1998. It's barely broken in." Jessica was worse. She would walk through my home with the critical eye of a health inspector, her gaze lingering on a scuff mark on the baseboard, a crack in the plaster. She saw my life not as a testament to resilience, but as a portrait of failure. I was their embarrassing working-class mother, a relic from a past he was desperate to escape. I tried not to let it hurt. I was a proud woman. I had raised my son, I had paid my bills, I had built my fortress. And I owed nothing to anyone. I had no idea that my son and his wife were about to present me with a bill I never could have imagined, a bill that would cost me more than just my money. It would almost cost me my soul. The dream, when it arrived, was not my own. It was Stephen's, or more accurately, it was Jessica's. It was a dream of granite countertops, of a 3-car garage, of a zip code that would finally make her feel like she had arrived. Stephen, in his capacity as a real estate agent, had discovered it. A large, new construction McMansion in an affluent, soulless suburb of Baltimore County. It It was the kind of house that was all facade, a giant beige box with a two-story foyer and a lawn that was chemically unnaturally green. It was everything my little brick row house in Hampton was not. It was their dream. They invited me to the open house, an invitation that felt more like a summons. I walked through the cavernous empty rooms, my sensible shoes echoing on the newly installed hardwood floors. The house felt cold, impersonal like a furniture showroom. But Stephen and Jessica were in a state of rapture. They moved through the house with a kind of feverish, desperate excitement, their voices a low, urgent murmur of plans and possibilities. "Look at this kitchen, Stevie," Jessica had whispered, her hand caressing the massive granite-topped island. "Can you imagine the parties we could have? All of my friends would be so jealous." "And the master suite, Jess," Stephen had replied, his eyes wide with a greedy, aspirational light. "It's bigger than our entire apartment." They were not seeing a home. They were seeing a stage. A backdrop for the perfect, successful life they were so desperate to project. The price tag, of course, was astronomical. It was a sum so far beyond their means that it was laughable. But they were not laughing. They were deadly serious. A week later, Stephen called me. The false, cheerful bravado in his voice had been replaced by a familiar, panicked edge. "Mom," he'd said, "we have a problem." He told me they had put in an offer on the house. And they had started the mortgage application process. And to their apparent shock and disbelief, they had been rejected. "The bank is being ridiculous," he'd said, his voice full of a manufactured outrage. "They said our debt-to-income ratio is too high. Can you believe that? They're punishing us for a few little credit card bills." A few little credit card bills. I knew from the mail that still occasionally arrived at my house for him, that it was far more than that. It was a mountain of debt, a testament to years of living a life they could not afford. "So what are you going to do, Stephen?" I had asked, my voice neutral. "Well," he'd said, his voice dropping, becoming a smooth, persuasive purr. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. There's a way to fix this. A way for us to still get our dream house. But we're going to need your help." I felt a cold, familiar knot of dread tighten in my stomach. I knew what was coming. I had been his emergency bailout plan his entire adult life. The broken-down car, the unexpected medical bill, the investment opportunity that had gone bust. I had always been there with my steady, reliable savings to patch the leaks in the sinking ship of his financial life. But this was different. This wasn't a patch. This was a whole new, much larger and far more dangerous ocean liner. "We just need a co-signer, Mom," he'd said, the words a casual, easy thing in his mouth. "Someone with good credit, with a stable income, with some assets. Someone like you. It's just a formality, really. Just to get the bank to approve the loan. It won't cost you a thing. It won't cost you a thing." The four most expensive words in the English language. I had hesitated. The little voice in the back of my head, the voice that sounded a lot like my late husband Charles, was screaming, "Don't do it, Maggie. It's a trap." But the other voice, the voice of my mother's heart, was whispering, "He's your son. He's in trouble. You have to help him." The dream house was a fantasy, a dangerous, unaffordable fantasy. But it was my son's fantasy. And he was about to ask me to sign my own name, my own good, solid, respectable name, to his flimsy, fraudulent dream. He came to my house that Sunday not with the arrogant swagger of a real estate agent, but with the practiced, theatrical humility of a prodigal son. He brought flowers, a cheap bouquet from the grocery store, and a look on his face of such profound, sorrowful desperation that it was almost believable. Jessica was not with him. This was a solo performance. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had helped him with his homework, where I had bandaged his scraped knees, where I had listened to all his childhood dreams. And he began his pitch. "Mom," he said, his voice a low, emotional murmur, his eyes fixed on his hands, which were clasped nervously on the table. "I know I haven't always been the son you deserved. I know I've made mistakes. I've been foolish with money. I see that now. It was a good opening. A confession. An admission of guilt. It was designed to disarm me, to make me feel like the wise, forgiving matriarch. But this house, Mom," he continued, his voice thick with a carefully rehearsed emotion. "This isn't just about me. It's about Jessica. It's about my children. It's about building a future. A legacy. The kind of life you and Dad gave me." The invocation of his late father was a particularly cynical and effective touch. He knew how much I missed Charles, how much I valued the stable, loving home we had built together. "I want to give my kids a backyard to play in," he said, his eyes now glistening with unshed tears. "I want to give them a good school district. I want to give them the kind of childhood that you gave me. But I can't do it without you. The bank, they just don't see the big picture. They just see the numbers. They don't see the dream." He finally looked up at me, his eyes full of a pleading, desperate hope. "I'm asking you, Mom, not just as my mother but as my partner. I'm asking you to co-sign this loan for us. It would be the last gift you ever had to give me. A final act of faith. A way to secure the future of your own grandchildren. The last gift." The words were a beautiful, poetic piece of emotional blackmail. He was framing this not as a financial transaction, but as a final sentimental gesture, a mother's last great act of love before she faded into a quiet, gentle old age. And then he delivered the promise. The one that was designed to quell all my fears, to answer all my unspoken questions. "And you'll be there with us, Mom," he said, his voice now bright with a new, hopeful energy. "The new house has a beautiful private in-law suite on the first floor. It's got its own entrance, its own bathroom. It's perfect for you. You won't have to worry about climbing these old stairs anymore. You'll have your own space, but you'll be with family. We'll be there to take care of you, to honor you. You will be the queen of our new home." It was a beautiful picture he painted. A picture of a loving, multi-generational family, living together in a beautiful new home. A picture of me not as a financial tool but as a cherished, honored elder. I was a 72-year-old widow. I was lonely. The quiet, empty house that was my fortress was also, sometimes, my prison. The thought of being with my grandchildren every day, of having my son just down the hall, of being a part of a bustling, loving family again, it was a powerful, seductive dream. I looked at my son's face, at the tears in his eyes, at the desperate hope etched into every line of his handsome face. And the voice of my mother's heart won out over the voice of my late husband's common sense. "Okay, Stephen," I said, my own voice a little shaky. "Okay, baby. I'll do it." The look of relief that washed over his face was so profound, so absolute, that for a moment, I almost believed his performance had been real. He rushed to my side and hugged me, his arms wrapped tightly around me. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered into my hair. "Thank you. You won't regret this. I promise." He was right about one thing. I wouldn't regret it. Because in the end it would be he, not I, who would be left with a lifetime of regret. But I didn't know that then. I just knew that I had given my son the last gift he had asked for. And in doing so I had just signed my own commitment papers. The mortgage broker's office was a cold, impersonal place. All gray carpets and fluorescent lighting. It was a world away from the warm, familiar chaos of the bus depot or the quiet, comfortable clutter of my own home. I sat at a large, intimidating conference table, with Stephen on one side and Jessica on the other. They were in their element, their faces alight with a greedy, triumphant excitement. I was just a nervous old woman, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, feeling completely and totally out of my depth. The broker, a man with a slicked-back ponytail and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, slid a mountain of paperwork across the table. It was a dizzying, incomprehensible sea of fine print, of legal jargon, of numbers and boxes. "Okay, Margaret," Stephen said, his voice a smooth, confident purr. He had switched from the emotional, pleading son to the professional, competent real estate agent. "It's a lot of paper, I know. But it's all just standard procedure. I'll walk you through it. You just need to sign where I show you." And so began the deception. He was a real estate agent. He knew this world. He knew the language. He knew the loopholes. And he used that knowledge not to protect me but to deceive me. He would slide a document in front of me, his finger pointing to a signature line at the bottom of a page. "This one is just the standard loan application, Mom," he'd say breezily. "Just your basic information. This is the truth in lending statement. It just breaks down the costs. This is the good faith estimate. Standard stuff." He spoke with such a casual, confident authority that I didn't question him. I was his mother. He was my son. He was the expert. I trusted him. I now know that buried deep within that mountain of paper, in the dense, unreadable paragraphs of the primary mortgage agreement, was the clause that was the key to his entire scheme. The owner occupancy clause. My niece Angela explained it to me later. When you apply for a mortgage, you have to declare how you will use the property. If it's an investment property that you plan to rent out, the interest rates are higher, the lending standards stricter. If it's an owner-occupied property, a primary residence where the borrower will actually live, the rates are lower, the terms more favorable. It's a better deal. Stephen, in his greed, had wanted the better deal. And the only way to get it was to use my sterling credit, my stable pension income, my lifetime of financial responsibility. But to do that, he had to have me on the loan. And for the bank to approve such a large loan for a man with his debt and his unstable income, they needed the assurance that the other, more stable borrower, me, would also be living in the house. So he had me sign the application not as a non-occupant co-borrower, a role for which we might not have been approved, but as a full owner-occupant co-borrower. He had me and himself legally attest to the bank, under penalty of perjury and federal prosecution for mortgage fraud, that I, Margaret Reed, would be using that new suburban McMansion as my primary residence. He never explained this to me, of course. He just pointed and said, "Sign here, Mom." And I, in my blind, foolish trust, had signed. I had signed a legally binding document, attesting to a fact that he knew with a cold, premeditated certainty was a lie. Jessica was his accomplice in this deception. She would sit beside me, her hand on my arm, her voice a soft, reassuring murmur. "Isn't this exciting, Margaret? We're all going to be one big happy family. That new suite is going to be so perfect for you. We'll get you new curtains, whatever you want." They were a perfect team, a pair of grifters playing their parts to perfection. He was the competent, professional son, guiding his dear old mother through a confusing process. She was the warm, loving daughter-in-law, already planning my new life in our new home. The entire process took over an hour. I signed my name, my full legal signature, dozens of times. Each time I was unknowingly digging my own grave, unknowingly handing them the shovel. When it was all over, we stood outside the broker's office in the bright afternoon sun. Stephen was beaming, his face flushed with victory. He had done it. He had secured his dream house. "You were great in there, Mom," he said, giving me a hug. "You're a lifesaver. This is the beginning of a whole new life for all of us." He was right about that. It was the beginning of a new life. Just not the one I was expecting. I had walked into that office a proud, independent, and financially secure woman. I walked out as an unwitting participant in a federal crime, a woman who had just co-signed the lease on her own prison cell. The loan, of course, was approved. With my unblemished credit history, my steady, reliable pension, and my significant savings as assets, the bank saw us as a solid bet. They had no reason to suspect that the application was built on a foundation of lies. The approval came through and a closing date was set. The weeks leading up to the closing were a whirlwind of activity. Stephen and Jessica were in a state of manic, joyous excitement. They were picking out paint colors, ordering new furniture, planning the housewarming party. They spoke of the new house constantly, of our new life, of the beautiful in-law suite that was waiting for me. "Mom, you're going to love it," Jessica would say, showing me pictures on her phone of elegant, serene bedrooms from a design magazine. "We'll make it your own little sanctuary. A real queen's quarters." They were so convincing, so full of a bright, happy energy, that I allowed myself to be swept up in it. My initial fears, the warning voice of my late husband, were silenced by the happy, bustling reality of our shared dream. I started to pack up my own house, the little brick fortress in Hampton. It was a bittersweet task. Every object held a memory of my life with Charles, of raising my son. But I told myself that I was not losing a home. I was gaining a family. I was trading my lonely, quiet fortress for a bustling, loving castle. The day of the closing, I did not go with them. "It's just a formality, Mom," Stephen had said. "No need for you to sit through all that boring paperwork again. We'll handle it." I now know that he didn't want me there. He didn't want me in the room where a lawyer might have casually asked me about my moving plans, where my honest answer might have unraveled his entire scheme. They came to my house that evening, a bottle of expensive champagne in hand, their faces flushed with the thrill of victory. "We did it!" Jessica had shrieked, throwing her arms around me. "The house is ours." We celebrated. We drank the champagne from my simple, everyday glasses. They toasted me, their savior, their partner, the woman who had made it all possible. "To you, Mom," Stephen had said, his eyes shining with what I, in my naivety, had believed were real tears of gratitude. to our new life together. That night I went to sleep with a heart full of a quiet, hopeful joy. The boxes were packed. The future was bright. I was a little sad to be leaving my old home, but I was excited to be starting a new chapter, to be surrounded by my family, to be the honored, cherished queen in their new home. The betrayal came the very next day. They arrived at my house around noon. I was expecting a moving truck. I was expecting them to be in their work clothes, ready to start hauling boxes. Instead, they were dressed in the same sharp, expensive clothes they had worn to the closing. And they were not alone. They were with a woman I had never seen before. A woman in a crisp professional suit with a plastic name tag clipped to her lapel. "Mom," Stephen said, his voice devoid of the warm, emotional tone from the night before. It was back to the cold, clinical voice of the real estate agent. "This is Susan. She's the director of the Golden Years Assisted Living Facility." The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, a sentence that had no meaning in the context of my reality. Assisted living? Why would we be talking about assisted living? I looked from Stephen's cold, impassive face to Jessica's, which was a mask of a kind of pitying, condescending sympathy. And then I looked at the woman, Susan, who was holding a glossy trifold brochure. The cover of the brochure had a picture of smiling, silver-haired seniors, sitting in a sterile, brightly lit common room. And in that instant the entire monstrous and unthinkable truth crashed down on me. The in-law suite. The Queen's quarters. The new life together. It was all a lie. A cruel, elaborate, and perfectly executed con. They had never had any intention of me living with them. They had just needed my name. My credit. My pension. And now that they had it, now that the sale was closed and the house was theirs, they were here to discard me. To dispose of the inconvenient old woman whose purpose had been served. "We're so sorry, Mom," Stephen said, the words a hollow, meaningless script. "But we were talking and we just realized, the new house, it's just not equipped for your needs. There are stairs. It's a lot of upkeep. We were so worried about you being there alone when we're at work." "This is for the best," Jessica chimed in, her voice a soft, poisonous purr. "At Golden Years you'll have round-the-clock care. You'll have activities. You'll be with people your own age. It's a wonderful place. We've already put down the deposit for you." I couldn't speak. The shock was a physical thing, a paralysis that had seized my entire body. I just stood there in the hallway of my home, surrounded by the packed boxes of my life, and I stared at my son, at the stranger who had used my love and my trust to utterly, completely destroy me. He had not just stolen my money. He had stolen my future. He had taken my dream of a loving, family-filled retirement and he had turned it into a nightmare of abandonment and betrayal. The last gift had been given. And this was my reward. A brochure for a nursing home. They didn't give me time to process, to argue, to fight. The betrayal was executed with the swift, brutal efficiency of a military operation. While I was still reeling from the shock, Stephen was already moving through my house, my home, with a cold, proprietary air. "We'll handle all this, Mom," he said, gesturing vaguely at the packed boxes that represented my entire life. "We'll put most of it in storage for you. You just need to pack a small suitcase with your essentials. Clothes for a week or so. Your medication. The car is waiting." Car. Not a moving truck. Just his sleek black luxury sedan, parked at the curb like an elegant hearse, waiting to carry me away to my new life, my living death. I moved through the next hour in a fog of numb, silent horror. I packed a small bag, my hands moving with a slow, clumsy automation. I packed my toothbrush, my blood pressure medication, a few changes of clothes, the small framed picture of my late husband, Charles, that had sat on my bedside table for 20 years. They watched me, their expressions a carefully constructed mask of gentle, concerned sympathy. They were playing their parts to the very end. The loving, dutiful children, making a difficult but necessary decision for their beloved, but sadly incompetent mother. The drive to the nursing home was a silent 20-minute journey through a part of the city I didn't know. We drove past neat, suburban houses, past parks where children were playing. A normal world, a world I was no longer a part of. The Golden Years Assisted Living Facility was not the sunny, cheerful place from the brochure. It was a low brick building with a tired, institutional feel. The air inside smelled of disinfectant and boiled cabbage. The common room was filled with old people sitting in wheelchairs, staring blankly at a television that was blaring a game show. Their faces were vacant, their eyes empty. This was not a place of golden years. This was a place of waiting. A place where people came to disappear. The check-in process was a blur of paperwork. Stephen, with the power of attorney I had so foolishly given him years ago, signed everything. I was just a piece of cargo being transferred from one location to another. They walked me to my room. It was small, sterile, and painted a pale, depressing shade of yellow. It had a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. This was my new home. My queen's quarters. When it was time for them to leave, Jessica gave me a quick, awkward hug. "We'll come visit soon, Margaret," she said, her voice a bright, false thing. "Once you're all settled in." Stephen couldn't even look at me. He just stood in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the floor. "It's for the best, Mom," he mumbled, the words a final, pathetic attempt at justifying his own monstrous betrayal. And then they were gone. The door closed behind them and I was alone. Alone in the sterile yellow room with my small suitcase and the framed picture of my dead husband. The full weight of what had just happened crashed down on me. The love for my son, the love that had been the central guiding force of my entire life, curdled into something else. Something cold and hard and full of a rage so profound it felt like it would burn me alive from the inside out. He had not just lied to me. He had used my love as a weapon against me. He had used my trust as a tool to steal my financial security. He had taken my life savings, my good name, my future, and he had given me this in return. A cot in a sad, lonely room that smelled of despair. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and I did not cry. The shock and the grief had been burned away by the white-hot fire of my anger. I was a bus driver. I was a woman who had spent her life navigating a complex, dangerous city, a woman who knew how to deal with trouble. And my son, my foolish, greedy, and deeply stupid son, had just become the biggest trouble of my life. He thought he had won. He thought he had discarded me, that he had tied up the loose end. He thought I was just a helpless old woman who would quietly fade away in this sad yellow room. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He had no idea the kind of resources a woman builds over a lifetime of quiet, steady, and honorable work. He had put me in a nursing home. But he had not buried me. He had just given me a quiet place to plan my revenge. My niece, Angela Peterson, was my sister's girl and she was the light of my life. At 40 she was everything my own son was not. She was smart, she was hardworking, she was fiercely loyal, and she had a core of integrity that was as solid as the city of Baltimore itself. She worked as a mortgage underwriter for a major bank, a job that was a perfect fit for her sharp, detail-oriented mind. She understood the world of finance, of loans, of legal documents, in a way that I never could. We had a standing date. Every Tuesday evening she would come to my house in Hampton, and we would have dinner together. We'd talk about her work, about my garden, about the latest neighborhood gossip. It was the anchor of my week. The Tuesday after I was committed, I knew she would come to the house and find me gone. I knew she would worry. But I had no way to call her. My phone had been taken from me at check-in, for my own safety, they had said. She arrived at the nursing home at 7 o'clock that evening, her face a mask of frantic, terrified worry. She had found me by calling every hospital and care facility in the Baltimore area, a methodical, desperate search that had finally led her here. When she walked into my small yellow room and saw me sitting there in a faded, state-issued gown, her professional composure shattered. "Aunt Maggie," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh my God. What happened?" "I went to the house and it was empty. But I thought something terrible had happened to you." She rushed to my side and wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time since my ordeal began, I let myself cry. I cried out of grief, out of rage, out of the sheer, profound relief of seeing a friendly, loving face. I told her everything. The whole sordid, unbelievable story. The dream house, the co-signing, the last gift, the promise of the in-law suite, the final, brutal betrayal. She listened, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief, and then to a cold, controlled fury that was far more terrifying than any shouting could have been. The mortgage underwriter in her, the woman who spent her days dissecting financial documents and sniffing out fraud, was listening to my story not just as a niece, but as a professional. "He had you co-sign," she said, her voice a low, dangerous hum when I had finished. "And the loan was approved based on your income and your credit." "Yes," I said. "And he promised you would live there in an in-law suite." "Yes." "And then the day after the closing he put you in here." "Yes." She stood up and began to pace the small room, her mind clearly working, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "Something's not right about this, Aunt Maggie," she said, more to herself than to me. "Something is legally, fundamentally wrong with this picture." She stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes sharp, analytical. "Did you see all the documents you signed? Do you have copies?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "Stephen he told me where to sign. He said it was all standard. I only have a few of the initial application pages he left with me." "Let me see them," she commanded. I retrieved the small folder of papers from my suitcase. It wasn't much, just a few pages from the initial loan application, the ones that detailed our respective assets and incomes. Angela took the papers and scanned them, her expert eyes moving quickly over the dense financial text. She stopped at one page, her finger tracing a line. "Aunt Maggie," she said, her voice tight. "What was the interest rate on this loan?" "I don't know, dear," I said. "Stephen said it was a very good rate." "It's a very good rate, all right," she said, a grim, bitter smile on her face. "It's a primary residence, owner-occupied rate. It's the best rate you can get." She looked up at me and her eyes were like chips of ice. "And that," she said, "is a very big problem for your son." I didn't understand. But I could see from the look on her face, from the cold, hard certainty in her eyes, that my brilliant, sharp and fiercely protective niece had just found the loose wire. She had just found the faulty part. And she was about to pull it and watch my son's entire fraudulent engine seize up and die. Angela's mind, once it had locked onto a problem, worked with the beautiful, terrifying precision of a high-performance engine. The vague, emotional sense that something was wrong had been replaced by the cold, hard certainty of a professional who had just spotted a clear case of fraud. "Okay, Aunt Maggie," she said, her voice all business now. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we are going to get you out of this place. But we have to be smart about it. Stephen has power of attorney. We can't just walk you out of here. We need leverage." She pulled out her smartphone and began to type, her thumbs flying across the screen. "I'm starting the investigation right now," she said. Her first step was to access the public property records for Baltimore County. It was a simple search for a professional like her. She typed in the address of the new house, the dream house that had become my nightmare. The screen lit up with the details of the recent sale. The price, the date of closing, and, most importantly, the details of the mortgage. "There it is," she said, turning the phone towards me. She pointed to a line of text. "Lender, First National Bank of Maryland. Loan type, 30-year fixed, owner-occupied." "I still don't understand, Angela," I said. "What does that mean?" "It means everything, Aunt Maggie," she said, her eyes gleaming with a cold, strategic light. "It means the bank gave them that loan with that excellent interest rate, under the legal sworn condition that all the primary borrowers, that's you and Stephen, would be living in that house as your main home. It's not just a promise, it's a legal requirement of the loan." She stood up and began to pace again, the pieces of Stephen's crime laying themselves out in her mind. "Your son is a real estate agent. He knows this. He knows the rules better than anyone. This wasn't a mistake. This was a deliberate, calculated act of fraud." She explained it to me in simple, clear terms. Stephen and Jessica, with their mountain of debt and his unstable income, could have never qualified for that loan on their own. And even if they had, they certainly wouldn't have qualified for the best interest rate. But by adding me with my perfect credit, my stable pension and my significant savings to the application, they had looked like a much better risk. "But the key," she emphasized, "the thing that got them the best deal, the thing that likely pushed the approval over the top, was listing you as an owner-occupant. It told the bank that a financially stable, responsible retiree would be living in the home, ensuring the mortgage was paid. It gave them a level of security they wouldn't have had otherwise." "So he lied," I whispered, the full, cold and calculated nature of his crime finally becoming clear. "He did more than lie, Aunt Maggie," she said, her voice a low growl. "He committed a federal crime. Mortgage fraud. Occupancy fraud, to be specific. And banks do not take kindly to being lied to, especially when it involves this much money." The investigation had begun. The red flag had been spotted. And now Angela was ready to dig deeper, to build the case, to gather the ammunition we would need to not just get me out of this place, but to bring my son's entire fraudulent world crashing down around him. She spent the next hour on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She was a hunter, and she was tracking her prey through a digital wilderness of public records and financial data. The power of attorney, she murmured, her eyes narrowed in concentration. He used it to commit you here. But he can't use it to control your personal finances, not without a much higher level of legal authority, which I guarantee he doesn't have. She helped me log into my own bank accounts, my pension portal. And we saw that he had already been trying to probe to gain access. There were records of failed login attempts, of password reset requests. He wasn't just content with the house, he was coming for my savings too. The picture was now complete. It was a premeditated, systematic plan to strip me of everything I had. My home, my freedom, and my life savings. Okay, Angela said, closing her laptop. Her face was set with a new, powerful resolve. I have everything I need. The public record of the loan, the proof of your residency here, the evidence of his attempts to access your accounts. We have him, Aunt Maggie. We have him cold. The investigation had taken less than 2 hours. But in those 2 hours, the balance of power had shifted completely. I was no longer the helpless, discarded old woman. I was the star witness in a federal fraud case. And my son, the slick, successful real estate agent, was no longer the master of his own destiny. He was just a common criminal, a con artist whose luck was about to run out. The days that followed Angela's visit were a strange mixture of quiet patience and a thrilling, simmering anticipation. I was still a resident of the Golden Years facility, still subject to its dreary routines and its condescending nurses. But on the inside I was a different woman. I was no longer a victim. I was a co-conspirator in a plot for justice. Angela had given me a mission. A purpose. Just act the part, Aunt Maggie, she had instructed me, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper before she left. Be the confused, slightly sad old woman they think you are. Don't make waves. Don't cause trouble. Let them think they've won. Let them get comfortable. So I did. I played the role of a lifetime. I would sit in the common room, a vacant look on my face. I would eat my bland, tasteless meals without complaint. When Stephen and Jessica would call for their brief, perfunctory weekly check-in, I would sound weak, confused, and grateful. Oh, Stephen, it's so good to hear your voice. I'd say, my voice a frail, trembling thing. It's very nice here. Everyone is so kind. See, Mom, he'd say, his voice full of a relieved, self-congratulatory warmth. I told you it was for the best. You're safe. You're being cared for. Yes, dear, I'd whisper. Thank you for taking such good care of me. I could almost hear him preening on the other end of the line. He had gotten away with it. His difficult, inconvenient mother was safely and quietly tucked away, and he was free to enjoy his new perfect life in his new perfect house. Meanwhile, Angela was a whirlwind of quiet, methodical activity. She was building our case not for a messy public lawsuit, but for a single, devastating and anonymous phone call. She explained to me that we didn't need to sue him. We didn't need to hire a lawyer. The beauty of the crime he had committed was that the victim was not just me. The primary victim was the bank. And a bank, when it has been defrauded, becomes a far more powerful and unforgiving enemy than any jilted mother could ever be. The bank has its own internal investigation unit, its own team of lawyers, she explained to me over the phone, her voice a hushed, excited whisper. They have a direct line to the FBI. All we have to do is give them the information. We light the fuse and we step back and watch the bank handle the explosion. She spent a week gathering the final, irrefutable pieces of proof. She had me sign a release form, allowing her to obtain my official medical records, which clearly stated that while I had a managed chronic illness, I was of perfectly sound mind and had never been diagnosed with any cognitive decline. This would directly contradict the claims Stephen had made in his petition to have me committed. She also hired a private investigator for a single simple task. The PI went to the Golden Years facility, posing as a prospective client for his own aging mother. He took a tour. And he got a copy of the residency agreement, a document that clearly stated the facility was a long-term permanent care residence. This was the final nail in the coffin. We now had the public record of the owner-occupied loan. We had the proof of my permanent residency in a nursing home. And we had the medical records to prove that the reasons for my commitment were fraudulent. The fraud was no longer just a theory. It was a documented, undeniable fact. Stephen had not just lied. He had created a complex, interwoven web of deceit, involving multiple institutions and a series of legally binding documents. Angela compiled it all into a neat, professional file. A timeline of events, copies of the relevant documents, a clear, concise summary of the fraud. "It's ready, Aunt Maggie," she told me when she came for her next visit. She laid the file on the small table in my room. Looked so thin, so innocuous. But I knew it was a bomb. "So what now?" I asked, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a fierce, thrilling anticipation. "Now," she said, a slow, cold smile on her face, "we make the call. We become the anonymous whistleblower. And we let the professionals take it from here." She showed me the number she had found on the bank's website. It was for their official 24-hour fraud prevention hotline. A number that would connect us to a team of people whose entire job was to investigate and punish people like my son. The fraud had been uncovered. The case had been built. And now it was time to deliver the verdict. The plan was set. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Angela and I decided that the call should be made from outside the nursing home, from a place of privacy and power. That weekend, Angela signed me out for a family outing, a perfectly normal and in our case beautifully deceptive event. We didn't go to a park or a restaurant. We went to Angela's quiet, sunlit apartment. Felt like I was breathing free air for the first time in weeks. She made me a cup of real strong coffee and we sat at her dining room table, the file containing all our evidence laid out between us. "Are you ready to do this, Aunt Maggie?" she asked, her voice gentle but her eyes firm. I took a deep breath. A part of me, the mother part, was still recoiling in horror at what I was about to do. I was about to deliberately and methodically destroy my own son's life. I was about to set in motion a chain of events that would lead to his financial ruin, and potentially his imprisonment. But then I thought of his face, the cold, impassive look in his eyes as he had told me it was for the best. I thought of the sterile yellow walls of my room at the nursing home. I thought of the empty, vacant eyes of the other residents, the other discarded parents. And the last lingering vestiges of my maternal hesitation were burned away by the cold, hard fire of my resolve. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I'm ready." Angela had prepared a script for me, a calm, factual, and devastatingly simple statement. It was designed to give the bank's fraud department exactly what they needed, without any emotional, hysterical language that might make them dismiss me as just a bitter, angry old woman. She slid the script in front of me. I put on my reading glasses and read it over. "Good afternoon. I am calling to report a case of suspected mortgage fraud regarding loan number 743-9B-22A. My name is Margaret Reed and I am a co-borrower on that loan. The loan was approved as an owner-occupied mortgage, with the legal stipulation that all borrowers use the property at 123 Maple Glen Drive as their primary residence. I am calling to inform you that this is a material misrepresentation. The other co-borrower, my son, Stephen Reed, who is also a licensed real estate agent, intentionally and knowingly had me sign the application as an owner-occupant, with no intention of ever allowing me to live in the home. As proof of this, I can confirm that I am and have been since the day after the loan closed, a permanent resident of the Golden Years Assisted Living Facility, located at 4500 West Franklin Street. My son had me committed to this facility against my will. You can verify my residency here. This is a clear violation of the terms of the loan agreement, and I believe it constitutes a deliberate act of occupancy fraud. It was perfect. It was cold, it was factual, and it was undeniable. It gave them the loan number, the specific type of fraud, and the single, irrefutable piece of evidence they needed to verify my claim, my location. Angela pushed her phone across the table. "You should be the one to make the call, Aunt Maggie," she said. "It needs to be your voice. The voice of the woman they have on the application." My hand trembled as I picked up the phone. I took one last deep breath and I dialed the number for the fraud prevention hotline. The call was answered on the second ring. First National Bank Fraud and Loss Prevention, a calm, professional male voice said. "How can I help you?" I looked at Angela. He gave me a firm, encouraging nod. And then I began to read. I read the script, my voice shaking at first but growing stronger and steadier with every word. The man on the other end of the line was silent, his professional calm a stark contrast to the explosive, life-altering information I was delivering. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. When I finished, there was a long pause. I could hear the faint, distant sound of a keyboard clicking. "Ma'am," the man finally said, his voice now laced with a new, serious gravity. "Could you please confirm your name and date of birth for me?" I did. "And could you confirm the property address and the loan number again?" I did. More clicking. "And the name and address of the facility where you are currently residing?" "The Golden Years Assisted Living Facility," I said, my voice clear. 4500 West Franklin Street. "Thank you, Mrs. Reed," he said. "We take allegations of this nature very, very seriously. An investigator from our mortgage fraud division will be assigned to this case immediately. We will be in touch." And that was it. The quiet call was over. The fuse had been lit. The bomb had been planted. I hung up the phone, my entire body trembling with the aftershock of what I had just done. I had just become the whistleblower. I had just, with a single 5-minute phone call, set in motion the complete and total destruction of my own son. "You did it, Aunt Maggie," Angela said, her voice soft, her hand covering mine on the table. "You did the right thing." "Did I?" I whispered, a sudden overwhelming wave of a mother's guilt washing over me. "He's my son, Angela. My baby boy." "He stopped being your baby boy the moment he decided to use you, to lie to you, and to discard you like a piece of trash," she said, her voice fierce with a protective love. "He is a criminal who committed a federal crime. And he used you, a vulnerable senior, to do it. This is not a family dispute anymore. This is justice." Her words were a comfort, a necessary anchor in the storm of my own conflicting emotions. He was right. This was not just about my hurt feelings. This was about a serious, calculated crime. We spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of quiet, tense anticipation. The next move was the banks. And we knew, with Angela's professional experience, that it would not take them long to act. "They'll start by verifying your location," she explained. "A simple call to the nursing home will confirm you're a resident. Then they'll pull the original loan application. They'll see your signature on the owner occupancy affidavit. And that's it. That's all they'll need. The case will be open and shut." I returned to the nursing home that evening, back to my small yellow room, back to my role as the quiet, confused old woman. But on the inside I was a different person. I was a woman with a secret, a woman who was waiting for a bomb to go off. For 2 days there was silence. My weekly, perfunctory phone call with Stephen came and went. He was cheerful, full of stories about the new house, about the new furniture they had bought, about the plans for the new garden. He was living his dream. A dream he had built on a foundation of lies, a foundation that was about to be liquefied. The first sign that the fuse had reached the dynamite came on a Thursday. It was a call from Angela, her voice a low, excited hum. "It started, Aunt Maggie," she said. "A friend of mine at the county records office just called me. The bank has filed a formal inquiry on the loan. They're pulling all the documents. The investigation is officially underway." The bank was moving. The great, powerful, and unforgiving machinery of corporate justice was beginning to turn. And it was grinding its way slowly but surely towards my son. A bank, when it has been defrauded, does not move with the emotional, messy chaos of a family dispute. It moves with the cold, swift, and brutal efficiency of a predator. The investigation, as Angela had predicted, was a whirlwind. They had my testimony. They had the public record of the loan. And they had the undeniable, easily verifiable fact of my residency at the nursing home. The response came exactly 1 week after my quiet call. It did not come in the form of a phone call or an email. It came in the form of a registered letter delivered to the dream house in the suburbs, a letter that required a signature and that could not be ignored. I know what happened next because Angela, through her network of professional contacts, was able to piece it together. And later, much later, a broken and defeated Marcus would confess the entire humiliating story to his uncle, my brother. Stephen had signed for the letter, likely with a casual, untroubled air. He would have seen the bank's logo and assumed it was just some standard post-closing correspondence. He would have opened it in his grand 2-story foyer, the smell of new paint and new carpets in the air. And then he would have read the first sentence. The letter, as Angela explained it to me, would have been a legal document known as a demand for immediate payment, or an acceleration clause notice. It would have been written in the cold, unforgiving language of the law. It would have informed him that the bank, upon internal investigation, had discovered a material misrepresentation on his original loan application. Specifically, the fraudulent claim of owner occupancy by one of the primary co-borrowers, my son Stephen Reed. It would have stated that this act of fraud constituted a fundamental breach of the mortgage agreement, and as such the bank was exercising its right to accelerate the loan. And then it would have delivered the death blow. The entire outstanding balance of the mortgage, a sum of several $100,000, was hereby due and payable in full immediately. He would have been given a deadline. Usually in these cases, it is a stark and unforgiving 30 days. And the final paragraph would have been the one that turned his blood to ice. It would have informed him that if the full balance was not paid by the deadline, the bank would immediately initiate foreclosure proceedings on the property. And it would have added, the bank reserved the right to refer the matter of the fraudulent application to the appropriate federal authorities for a full criminal investigation. The dream was over. The beautiful, perfect life he had stolen for himself was revealed to be a house of cards, and the bank had just pulled out the bottom card. He was facing not just the loss of his home, but total financial ruin and the very real possibility of a federal prison sentence. The panic that must have ripped through him is almost unimaginable. He was a real estate agent. He knew better than anyone the gravity of the situation. He knew there was no way out. He didn't have the money. He couldn't get a new loan. He was trapped completely and utterly in the web of his own deceit. His first call, of course, was to me. I was in the common room pretending to watch the game show when the nurse came to tell me I had a phone call. I went to the phone at the nurse's station, my heart pounding. "Mom." His voice was a strangled, panicked squeak, a sound I had never heard from my confident, arrogant son. "Mom, you have to help me. The bank, they're calling the loan. They're saying we have to pay it all back. Right now." I played my part. "Oh my goodness, Stephen," I said, my voice full of a shocked, grandmotherly concern. "Pay it all back? Why on earth would they do that?" They're saying we lied on the application," he stammered. "Something about you not living here. Mom, you have to call them. You have to tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you were just planning on moving in later. Tell them anything." "Oh, Stephen, I don't know," I said, my voice trembling with a feigned helplessness. "I don't understand all that legal talk. And I can't lie to a bank. That sounds very serious." "It is serious, Mom," he shrieked, his voice cracking with a desperate, hysterical fear. "They're going to take the house. They're talking about prison." "Prison," I said, letting out a small, horrified gasp. "Oh, my dear boy. What have you gotten yourself into?" I let him plead. I let him beg. I let him unravel on the other end of the phone. And when he was done, when he had exhausted all his pleas and all his threats, I delivered the final, quiet and devastating blow. "I'm so sorry, Stephen," I said, my voice full of a deep, sorrowful regret. "But I can't help you. You were the one who said this was for the best. You were the one who said I was being cared for. I'm just an old woman in a nursing home. What could I possibly do?" I hung up the phone. The bank's response had been delivered. And my response, my final, quiet and total rejection of his plea for help, had been delivered as well. The trap had been sprung. And now all that was left was to watch him be crushed in its jaws. The 30 days that the bank had given them were a slow, agonizing countdown to their own destruction. Their perfect dream life in the suburbs became a pressure cooker of fear and recrimination. Angela, who had her own ways of keeping track of things, gave me the updates. The house, the one they had been so proud of, went up for sale immediately. A frantic, desperate attempt to sell it before the bank foreclosed. But the market was slow and their asking price, inflated by their own desperation, was too high. No one was biting. Their marriage, which had been a partnership in greed, began to crumble under the weight of their shared failure. The arguments were constant, the accusations flying back and forth. Jessica, who had been the primary driver of their ambition, now saw Stephen not as her partner in success, but as the architect of her ruin. She had wanted a life of luxury, not a life with a potential felon. They tried to get a new loan to refinance, but it was impossible. With a pending foreclosure and a fraud investigation on their record, they were financial pariahs. No bank would touch them. They were trapped. And the clock was ticking. On the 31st day, the final notice arrived. It was not a letter. It was a formal legal notice of foreclosure, delivered by a process server. The bank was taking the house. The end was a humiliating public spectacle. The foreclosure sale was scheduled. A for sale by owner sign was replaced by a stark, ugly notice of public auction sign on their perfectly manicured lawn, a declaration of their failure for the entire exclusive neighborhood to see. They were forced to move out before the auction, to pack up their new, expensive furniture, their dreams of a grand life into a rented moving truck. They had nowhere to go. They ended up, Angela told me, in a small, cramped rental apartment, the kind of place they had spent their entire lives trying to escape. But their nightmare was not over. The bank, having secured the property, was not a forgiving entity. They had still lost money on the deal. And they referred the case of the fraudulent application to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Stephen was charged with federal mortgage fraud. The final scene of my revenge was one I did not witness, but one that Angela described to me in vivid detail. She had attended the sentencing hearing. Stephen, my son, the slick, confident real estate agent, stood before a federal judge, a broken, weeping man. He was convicted and sentenced to 18 months in a low-security federal prison. His life was destroyed. He had lost his house, his career, his wife. Jessica had filed for divorce the moment he was convicted, and his freedom. All for a dream he had tried to build on a foundation of lies. Me. The day after Stephen was sentenced, Angela came to the nursing home. But she didn't come alone. He came with a lawyer. And she came with a court order, reversing the fraudulent commitment and restoring my full legal rights. I walked out of the Golden Years assisted living facility a free woman. I walked out into the bright, beautiful Baltimore sunshine, and I got into my niece's car. We didn't go to a new house. We didn't go to a fancy condo. We went back to my little brick row house in Hampton. My fortress. It was just as I had left it, the boxes still packed, a layer of dust covering everything. But it was mine. It was paid for. It was safe. I spent the next few weeks unpacking not just my belongings but my life. I put my husband's picture back on my bedside table. I put my books back on my shelves. I started to work in my garden again, my hands in the rich, dark soil. My revenge was complete. It had not been a loud, angry, or violent thing. It had been a quiet, methodical, and legal thing. I had simply reported a crime. I had told the truth. And I had let the system, the very system my son had tried to manipulate, deliver the final devastating notice. He had tried to put me in a prison of his own making. In the end, he was the one who ended up in a cell. And I was, at long last, home,